February was one of the worst months for several reasons. It was right in the middle of winter and spring, and the weather could be unpredictable. Sunny one day, rainy and foggy the next, making it impossible to prepare for. It was the shortest month, which always threw me off for not adhering to the usual 30-31 days. People spent the whole month commercializing and celebrating Valentine's Day, which itself was a load of rubbish, especially for a teenage boy like me. And finally, it was the month my sister drowned 4 years ago. She'd been swimming with her boyfriend in the local river in late February when the weather had turned warm, and somehow, the current had dragged her under. An unfortunate accident, everyone called it. The recklessness of the youth, as if it had been her fault. Every February since that day had been one long nightmare. It was like as soon as the month started, a switch turned in my brain and everything changed. I started getting night terrors, seeing things in the dark that shouldn't be there. Sometimes, I would wake up and felt like I couldn't breathe, like something was sitting on my chest. It happened every year, every February. Sleep became impossible. Paranoia crept in. I started seeing my sister's face everywhere I went. I started seeing her out of the corner of my eye, watching me across the street or from the edge of a mirror. I told myself it was just the grief, my brain manifesting loss in different ways. But this time, it was different. The first week of February passed quickly. I had a few restless nights, waking up to the sound of screaming that could have only come from my own mind. But the night terrors and sleep paralysis held off. At least until the second week. A few days before Valentine's, I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like I wasn't alone. My throat was bone dry and my chest felt heavy, like it was full of water. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't obey. So I stared up at the ceiling, watching darkness encroach on my vision until I could finally lift my head. I looked around the room. A figure stood out in the corner. Veiled in shadow, I couldn't make out any features, but my brain was telling me clearly that there was someone there. Fear gripped my chest, quickening my pulse. I told myself that it was just another night terror, that I was seeing things in the dark that weren't there. But that didn't stop it from feeling real. The fear was real, and so were the shadows. Swallowing thickly, I reached for the lamp beside my bed, my fingers fumbling to find the switch. As soon as I turned the lamp on, the figure in the corner disappeared. I breathed out a sigh of relief. It was nothing after all, just a trick of the light. Shaking my head, I switched the lamp back off and froze. The shadow from before was back, only this time, it was closer. The figure stood at the very end of my bed, shadow scurrying across a featureless face. The figure stood motionless. I couldn't take my eyes off it, my heart racing in my chest. What was it? What did it want? With slow, strained movements, I turned the lamp back on again. The shadowy figure disappeared again, and I sighed in relief. As long as I kept the light on, it couldn't get me. Right? I forced myself to calm down and try and fall back asleep. There's no use staying awake, fretting over something that couldn't hurt me. After some time, I must have eventually fallen back asleep, because the next time I woke up, the room was dark again. The light had been switched off. Almost immediately, my chest felt heavy, like something was sitting on it. I couldn't move. Every time I tried to breathe, I couldn't get enough oxygen and my head started to spin. A horrible, bitter taste coated my tongue, like dirt or silt. Then, it struck me. This is what my sister felt like when she drowned, when the water filled her lungs and she couldn't breathe. Something wet and cold touched my ankle then. Fingers, paled by death, crawled up my leg. In my head, I heard voices, gurgled and strained, like someone was trying to speak underwater.
He did this. He did this
Sunny. The pressure on my chest grew heavier. Hands tightened around my ankles, and all of a sudden, I felt like I was being dragged underwater, my whole body going cold and numb in shock. This had to be a dream. This couldn't be real.
He did this.
That wet, gurgling voice whispered in my ear, icy breath touching my neck. Alice? Is that you? I whispered, the words choking in my throat as they clawed against the darkness that smothered me. Alice?
He did this to me. You have to tell them.
I tried to look for her, but all I could see was pitch darkness. Somewhere in the distance, I heard water crashing against rocks, a distant gurgling scream. I knew I was dreaming, but everything felt so real. Alice, where are you?
He killed me.
I sat up with a gasp, shaking and covered in sweat. The lamp in my room was still on. I was alone. No shadows, no water, no Alice. Just my own thudding heart and panting breaths. A dream after all. But what had it meant? He killed me. That had been Alice's voice, the voice I heard every February in my dreams. But this time, it felt different, like she had really been speaking to me, warning me, desperate for me to know the truth, that her drowning hadn't been an accident after all.
Hey, Broccoli fam. Big announcement. I have started a new audio-only channel. For those of you who like to listen to their horror stories, do check it out once. I am sure you would love it. Putting the link in the description box. Love you all.
My name is Jesse. I have a huge family and we always shower each other with gifts for all the holidays. I don't make a lot of money, so it's always difficult to find presents that aren't too expensive. The worst time of the year is February, because that's when 3 of my sisters and 2 of my nieces have their birthdays. I usually go shopping right after the holidays to try to find the best deals, but this year I had to work over Christmas vacation, so I didn't have time to shop until the end of January. By then, all the best deals were over. I had to think of a group present that wasn't too expensive, so I went online and found a brand new escape room in my town. It didn't have any reviews yet, but the pictures looked appropriately spooky, and most importantly, it was cheap. I reserved 6 spots for me and all the girls having birthdays. I texted everyone that I was planning a group present and asked which date would work best for everyone. We settled on the Saturday after Valentine's. I arrived at the escape room first and instantly had regrets. It was located inside a big, sketchy-looking warehouse on the outskirts of the city with no signage or clear entrance. I was about to text everyone to cancel when a van pulled up with the rest of my family. My oldest sister, Nancy, got out first. She seemed really impressed with the place, like it was intentionally run down. They all started walking towards the building, and I was the last one to enter. We ended up inside a dingy waiting room with fluorescent lights flickering from the ceiling. There were dark red stains on the wall that definitely looked like dried blood. No one was there to greet us. I was surprised that everyone else seemed excited to be there. I was the only one who felt uncomfortable with the whole situation. When I had seen the photos online, I thought that the escape room had great decorations to make it look dangerous and off-limits. I had no idea that there were no decorations. It was all just an old, dilapidated building. An old woman walked in, wearing a nurse's uniform. She silently handed each of us waivers that we had to sign, and then she walked out of the room. All my relatives signed the papers without even reading them, but I started scanning through mine. It said that the company wasn't responsible for death and dismemberment. I didn't like that. Before I could read the whole thing, Nancy nudged me and said that I should just sign it. These kinds of waivers were standard for escape rooms. I'd never been to a place like this, so I couldn't argue. I signed the waiver. Instantly, the nurse walked back into the room and silently snatched up all the signed contracts, and then she left again. We stood there for a bit, until the door in the back of the room swung open by itself. Nancy walked in first, of course, but the rest of us followed. We ended up in a room that was so dark, we couldn't see anything. Then the door shut behind us, and we were trapped inside. A single light bulb flickered on, and we could see that the only object in the room was a small box in the corner. Nancy excitedly ran over and opened it, but gasped when she saw what was inside. She pulled out a paper and read it to us. "One of you must die before you can leave." Then she pulled out the other object in the box, a revolver. It looked so realistic, but Nancy was holding it like it was just some toy. I begged her to put it down, but she just laughed and pointed it right at me. "Careful," she said, "or you'll be the one who gets shot." Everyone laughed at that. I was horrified that I was the only one taking this seriously. I know that escape rooms are supposed to trick you, but the danger of this place felt so real. Nancy could tell that I was nervous, so she pointed the wall at the gun and fired, just to show me that it wasn't a real gun. To her surprise, a huge gunshot erupted and the bullet thunked into the wall. That was when everyone started to scream. Two of my sisters ran towards the door and tried to open it, but of course, we were locked inside. A voice came from an intercom saying that we had 50 minutes to escape. I screamed for them to open the door, but nothing happened. It wouldn't budge. Then, the light bulb went off again. We all stood there in darkness, trying to figure out what to do. This wasn't a real escape room. We were in danger, and we had no idea who had planned this or what exactly they wanted to happen. I demanded to know who had the gun, and Nancy said that she was still holding it. One of our other sisters suggested that we start feeling around the room if there was any other objects that could help us get out. I heard noises and footsteps as everyone got to work feeling along the walls and on the floor. After 5 minutes of that, we realized that there was nothing else in the room, just the gun. A voice came on again, saying that we now had 45 minutes left. Then the voice said something else that shook me to my core. It said that if we didn't choose one person to shoot, then none of us would get out of here alive. The message sounded deadly serious. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but the signal was blocked. My relatives all tried their phones too, but none of them worked. I felt like giving up. Whoever was keeping us here wanted us to turn on each other. I made my way back to the door and tried to figure out if there was another way to unlock it. I kept twisting on the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I thought about trying to pick the lock, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to. Suddenly, I felt a hand touch my shoulder. Nancy had come up from behind me. "You brought us here," she said. "It's your fault." I tried apologizing to her. I had no idea that this would happen, but Nancy wasn't listening. In the darkness, I heard her cock the gun. She was aiming it at me. "Don't shoot," I begged. "Please, there has to be another way out of here." She wasn't listening. I heard some sniffling and I knew that she was crying. I also knew that she was going to shoot me. I dove out of the way just as she fired the gun. The bullet barely missed me, but the blast left a huge hole in the door. Light streamed in from the lobby. I was able to reach through the hole and start breaking off more of the door until I could open up the door from the other side. We opened the door and all ran outside. Everyone was visibly shaken, and Nancy looked like she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Tears were streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she said. I was too numb to be mad. And besides, we made it out of the room and nobody had gotten hurt. I looked around for the nurse or anyone else, but the whole building seemed empty. We walked out of there, and when we got far enough from the building, I called the police. They arrived 5 minutes later, and Nancy showed them the gun. We explained what happened, and the police searched the area, but they didn't find anyone nearby. And when they went online to look up the escape room, the website had been deleted. I know they're still investigating, but we still don't have any other answers. Who set up the escape room? What was their big plan? We might never know. All I know for certain is that I will never do an escape room again.
The pizza smelled great, strong enough that I perceived the cheesiness from the closed box when he handed it to me. The wafting aroma made my stomach growl, beaten empty by long hours of drinking booze alone in my room and binging on TV. I was distracted by him when I opened the door to a man with glasses over his eyes, black hair slicked back into place by gel. He was a most curious-looking person. His heavy-set eyebrows were unforgettable. He was clean-shaven, neat around the mustache and the beard. His pants were a straight-cut cargo pants with pockets all over it. He had a pair of sneakers, dirt-stained and greasy, I assumed, from working long hours in delivery. He had a charming appearance, even though he didn't smile too much. I was affected by my assessment of this pizza delivery man that I didn't realize how strange it was to just stand there, in front of my door, looking a stranger straight in the eye. He cleared his throat, and it was only then that I shook myself from the reverie. "That'll be 7, he said, tapping the box of pizza to take my attention away from himself. I scoffed, flailing my hands in the air to dismiss the inconvenience. "I'm sorry, I blubbered, and the words trailed into silence. I flipped the cover open, and the smell intensified. My mouth watered as sweet savor washed down my senses. I shut the box and shoved my hands into my pocket. "Oh, I think my wallet is in my room." He smiled for the first time since our interaction and told me it was fine. I rushed back inside to fetch my wallet. The dark room enveloped me, and I only found my way towards my desk when it occurred to me that I had inadvertently left the door open to a stranger. The loud bang of my heart leaping in panic echoed in my ears, and I struggled for coordination as I placed my pizza on the desk. I sighted the wallet, snatched it, with the same motion that I spun around. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting." I was speaking when I noticed the stranger no longer stood at my door. My inebriation cleared, and I shook my head to concentrate on what this absence could possibly mean. "Hello?" I stuck my neck gingerly out of my door and stared this way and that on my floor. My call reverberated off the walls and returned to me. I swallowed carefully and pushed the door shut. I found myself lost in thought, pondering what had just happened. I attributed it to being drunk on an empty stomach and had possibly imagined all of our interaction. However, I was certain I hadn't imagined it. The lingering smell of pizza in my room confirmed my clarity. I muttered a cuss at my own sluggishness and made a mental note to pay it forward if I ever came across a pizza delivery person from the same pizza-making chain. "Strange," I said, rubbing my hands together as I made my way back to the desk. I sat facing my computer and tapped on the play button. The audio came on at once, as did the movie on my screen. The shuffling of feet, baffling sudden motions which I did not reconcile from what I was watching caught my attention from the dark room. I held my breath and waited out the curious noise. "What's that?" I said, the veil of my own lack of sobriety billowing with suspicion. I sensed something move in the room, but it was too dark to notice and I had too much liquor in me to investigate such an inconvenience. I moved a chair from the desk and ambled around it to sit down when I heard a more confirmatory sound of movement other than mine in my own room. My palm grew sweaty and my breath turned raspy. "It's been years," a demure voice called from within the room, sickly and wheezing. The fog of inebriation came and went as I struggled to place the voice, utterly refusing the thought that it was the pizza delivery guy who I suspected had a strange face that had been led into my room. He started to laugh, and his laughter startled me. I edged closer to the desk, perceiving a strong presence coming from where he was speaking from. "Get out of my room, you coward!" I shrieked. He did not budge. Such a blood-curdling, ear-peeling laughter of terror that made me shiver right where I stood. How the evening had spiraled from an innocent need to quench the hunger in my stomach to dealing with a mysterious horror in human flesh stupefied me. I debated running to the door to call for help. I turned my leg in the direction, but it occurred to me that moving from where I stood meant that I left myself vulnerable to his attacks. "Since I moved here, I haven't felt so much vitality in a person," he said, finally stepping out of his hiding place beside my couch, and he started to make his way towards me, hands held out. "I'm gonna enjoy seeing the life going out of your eyes." He was a much different man now, especially under the glow of the light from my screen. His eyes were more sinister and white, searching unceasingly. His arms were vein-stripped and sturdy. He wiped his brows and rushed straight at me. He caught my neck and squeezed my Adam's apple. The crushing pressure of his fingers on my pipe made me squeal. "Ah, yes!" he cried in a frenzy. His eyes were wider and crazed, fueled by his own powerfulness subduing me to a fatal end. My life flashed before my eyes. I was dealing with a serial killer who was unhinged on his power trip. I sputtered and tried to inhale. He locked my throat with his fingers. I blacked out and returned to consciousness with adrenaline pumping through my veins. I wrestled him off me, but he was strong and clever. He continued to laugh into my face, relishing my struggle for oxygen. As a matter of last resort, I struck him on the crotch with a powerful kick. He recoiled, releasing his grip on my throat, and I seized the moment to escape from him. "Come back here!" he groaned from the floor. "I should have brought my knife!" I was out of the room in a breeze. I made sure to keep the door locked, and with a stroke of luck, my neighbor walked in my direction. "Call the cops!" I hollered, grasping my hands on my chest. He did as I asked. The moment still reeled in my head as I pondered how terrifying it was for me to be moments away from being killed by a crazy pizza delivery person. The cops came and tased him before effecting their arrest. But I knew to never be so vulnerable ever again. I sat alone in my apartment watching Netflix. I'd broken up with my boyfriend Bill about a month ago, so it was going to be another solo night of Netflix and chill. I was fine with that. I missed having a boyfriend, but I didn't miss Bill. It was a total nightmare to live with. Despite all our arguments, all the times he snapped at me over nothing, Bill had been completely shocked when I decided to end things. It didn't go well. It had been weeks since I'd heard from him, though, so it seemed like he had finally taken the hint and gotten out of my life. So on the night when all this happened, I sat on my sofa and tried to relax. I made some popcorn and fixed myself a margarita. I didn't eat or drink any of it, though, because I had to pick the movie first. That was my rule. It was my way of making sure that I didn't speed through empty calories, and it also helped me pick movies faster. Without that incentive, I'd probably spend hours scanning through all the choices. I opened Netflix, and I noticed that there was a horror movie on my continue watching list. I never watch horror movies, so I knew right away that Bill must have saved my password and kept using my Netflix account. I was pissed, of course. I'd have to change my password right away, but first I clicked on the movie. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I was just curious. It was called Psycho X, which seemed pretty fitting. I guess Bill had stopped watching at around the halfway mark, so I rewound to 15 minutes earlier and pressed play. The movie showed a woman who looked a bit like me, same blonde hair, same glasses. She was sitting alone in her house, and there was a loud knock at the door. The woman, acting like a real idiot, ran to answer the door. No one was outside. She looked all around the porch. When she got back inside, she seemed pretty frazzled. So frazzled, in fact, that she didn't notice the masked man lurking right outside her window. She sat on her sofa, completely unaware that the man had climbed into her house. The woman started watching her movie, and the masked man lurked right behind her. He had a long wire in his gloved hands. He walked closer, and the floorboards creaked under him. Just as the woman turned around, the man wrapped the wire around her neck and squeezed. She struggled to push him away, but he just squeezed tighter. It was horrible. I hated movies like this. As the woman was choking to death, the masked man got right in her face and whispered, "You never should have left me." And with one more pull of the wire, she was dead. I stopped the movie. It was disgusting, but I could see why someone like Bill would like it. He probably sympathized with the killer. He probably stopped watching the movie halfway through because he didn't want to see the killer get caught at the end. He wanted to end things right there. I went back to the main menu and picked the first rom-com I could find. I needed something that would make me forget about Bill. Just as the opening credits started to play, I heard a loud knock on the door. My blood instantly ran cold. I paused the movie and walked to the front door. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. "Hello?" I called. No answer. This was exactly like the movie. As I walked back towards the living room, I noticed that my kitchen window was partly open. Again, just like in the movie. That was how the killer had snuck in. I thought about Bill, about all the horrible things he said to me, all the threats about ruining my life and getting revenge. Perhaps the movie had inspired him to act out what he saw on the screen. I wouldn't put it past him. But I was done living in fear. I was done thinking about that psycho. So I left the window open and, just in case, grabbed a knife from the drawer. Then I sat back down in front of the TV and restarted the movie. A few minutes later, I heard rustling from the other room. I didn't need to turn around. I knew what was happening. Bill was wriggling his fat body through the window. In the movie, the killer was quiet as a mouse. But this was real life, and Bill wasn't that talented. He slowly crept through the kitchen and into the living room. I could hear every one of his steps. It took all my strength not to turn around. I was scared, barely able to breathe, but mostly I was angry. If he was going to ignore the restraining order and sneak in, then I was going to fight back. His footsteps stopped, and I knew that he was standing right behind me. That was when I turned around and saw him looming over me. Just like in the movie, he held a wire over my head. I had just enough time to register his face, the homicidal look in his brown eyes, before he brought the wire down. I twisted out of the way before he could wrap it around my throat. Then I jumped up, a knife in hand, and stabbed him right in the stomach. He doubled over, then crumpled to the ground. I stood over him and stabbed again. He begged for me to stop. I could barely make out his words through all the blood that was pooling inside of his mouth. As he twitched on the floor, I told him, "You couldn't even think of an original way to kill me. You had a copy from some crappy movie." His breathing became heavy. "And don't steal my Netflix," I told him. I waited for a few minutes until I called the police. By then, he was gone. And even though my hands were dirty from his blood, I reached into my bowl and grabbed a handful of popcorn. It tasted good.